CEO of Topco Media, Mr. Ralph Fletcher, the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services, Mr. Nomalungelo, the Rector and Vice Chancellor of University of Free State, Professor Francis Peterson, the Rector and Vice Chancellor of UWC, Professor Vivnes Lawak, the Chancellor of the University of Pretoria, Professor Wiseman Gushu, CEO of Black Business Council, Khaki Matabane, CEO of Business Unit of South Africa, Cas Kodavia, CEO of Business Leadership South Africa, Busisiwe Mavuso, MD of BSAA, Bongiwe Kunene, CEO of National Development Agency, Mr. Tamu Mzobe. All our different corporate leaders present in this conference and government officials, the guests and all delegates, I greet you all. It is with absolute excitement for me to be invited to such an important conference that seeks to answer a very important question in the midst of the hard-hitting COVID-19 pandemic in our economy and to our enterprises. Indeed, as we are all constrained by the conditionalities that COVID-19 has created to society, and therefore forced government to make national regulations under lockdown to save lives, the unavoidable consequences that this has had in the economy is unimaginable. Small business enterprises, that is our SMEs, which is where the entire Black business are found, is the hardest hit by COVID-19. It is by no exaggeration that many of the SMEs will not survive after this pandemic. This is a troubling reality for government. In terms of Stats SA report that was issued in March 2020, out of the total number of 10.2 million employed South Africans, more than 9 million of them are employed by small business enterprises. Small business enterprises are the locomotive engine of our economy and employment because most of them are labor intensive. The full-scale effects of COVID-19 on Black business, that is BE level 1, will be felt through the numbers of retrenchments that have already begun from these companies because of the loss of trade. One of the difficult balance that has informed our approach as government during this lockdown has been a recognition that the priority must be to save lives, whilst on the other hand, mitigate the worst effect towards the economy, whose worst impact will result in people's lives being worst off. In other words, for us as government, the question has never been a choice between saving lives, even at the expense of the economy, or saving an economy at the risk of losing lives. This fine balance of the two is what informs President's approach at the smart phased-in reopening of economy, especially with sectors that are not posing risk of massive exposure to COVID-19. As the DTIC, the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, we are under no illusion that the entire economy will face contraction. What makes the situation worse is the reality that even before the lockdown, that is in March, our economy had gone to full recession and all rating agencies had downgraded South Africa. The country's downgrade has made borrowing by businesses at worst for Black business, which are always having liquidity issues, to be more expensive. This means that fewer emerging companies will meet the requirements and pass the means test for the loans. The International Monetary Fund, that is the IMF, has established that COVID-19 closing down of the economy as an additional factor to our economy. Our GDP will fall behind with 5.8% in 2020. The South African Reserve Bank estimates a fall to GDP by 6.1%, whilst IDC estimates a fall of 6.3% in 2020. These are bad news for our economy. If taking into account the ripple effects that this fall of GDP has against our efforts to raise the standard and equality of life, growing the size of small enterprises and reindustrialization efforts, the consequences of this oblique picture is the reduction of the foreign direct investment into the country, which in turn reduces job creation both in formal and informal sectors. The effects of COVID-19 towards Bbbee 100% Black-owned companies is likely to reverse the strides that have been covered over the last 20 years in the deliberate efforts made to build Black-owned companies. Black-owned companies will be in a difficult conundrum because they are fragile in their balance sheet, with no collateral to assist them in accessing credit, even in times where government has cut the base for lending rate. There is also a real danger that because of liquidity challenges, some of the Bbbee level companies may face closure and be forced to sell either the large percentages to non-BE level companies, and they must be forced to close down their shops. We are concerned about this because these realities represent a reversal of the very foundations of the Bbbee and transformation to our economy. This oblique picture requires a new way of doing things, especially from us in government, a capable development state that will drive the expansion trajectory to a broad-based Black economic empowerment with stringent timeframes is more urgent. This pandemic has exposed us as government in terms of the pace with which in the last 26 years we have been driving this Black agenda. We now have to rise above the parapet and drive massively the growth levels of Black companies, especially those built from scratch by Black, creating assets over and above those obtained through shares equities. We need a reset button and a different approach. This is a huge discussion in government, especially in the economic cluster. Unfortunately, it is a crisis brought about by COVID-19, but we must search to its cloud a silver lining. If the Asian tigers, that is Japan and South Korea, were an offset of the post-Second World War crisis through the aggressive drive by the state to coordinate and mobilize private sector for reinvestment and creation of new business, which turned those economies into what they are today, then we need to use this post-COVID-19 phase as a runaway time to build one of the Africa big and sophisticated economy. We need to reindustrialize our economy and be anchored around manufacturing. The phase that has taught us that speculative capital in our stock markets is not necessarily a condition for countries' wealth and prosperity. It is a bubble that is vulnerable, that whelms of investors' sentiments and can be fleeted away at a wink. But infrastructural investment, industrial investment, new economies such as those that arises from innovation and fourth industrial revolution can be leveraged for our country's prosperity. Unemployment is now sitting at 31%, and it represents a serious ticking time bomb to our social economy and stability. There is no country that can enjoy peace, that can enjoy crime-free and higher and brighter future with such levels of unemployment. It is even more stressing that the majority of unemployment falls under the age of youth. The first port of call that we are all called upon as government is to intervene decisively after COVID-19 in the labor-intensive absorptive sector. One of the discussions currently held in the sectoral determination on local employment on certain sectors by the Employment and Labour Minister, and another discussion that is held for the survivalist informal sectors such as spaza shops and townships for locals by our sister department of small business. Those are two important discussions that we are saying they are there to make sure that we shape the best economy of our country. So each and every department, especially in the economic cluster, they are all deliberating on the new accelerated approach, far different before the new normal, and reduces damages that the pandemic has caused as part of the COVID-19 recovery interventions. What is our response as the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition in South Africa? Immediately during lockdown, we have made available an amount of about 500 billion as a relief to the businesses under pressure. Our sister department, Small Business Development, also had a set of relief fund interventions for the small, medium enterprises. We recognize that government cannot have sufficient relief money for the entire economy. That is why we recognize the lamentations that regard some companies not receiving portions. Through IDC, we have set up a distress funding and the essential suppliers intervention. The funding is more than 3 billion for business support. The distress funding facility terms includes the following. 1, companies must be South African. It applies to companies that are IDC clients and the new companies in distress because of COVID-19 pandemic. There must be evidence that the concessionary finance will enable the business to trade out of any short to medium-term financial crisis. Distress funding cannot be used for funding bonuses and dividends. The company's financial need must be in excess of existence available in UIF and compensation fund. I'm just mentioning by just the few of some of the expectations that the companies must have when they want to access this funding. The post-COVID-19 phase will require that both government and business, especially Black companies, will work with government in recovery interventions. As government, we can never claim absolute knowledge and all the answers. We need a social compact and navigate the future mindful together. This is not the time to talk past each other and lay blames. We must work together. We are committed to the continuous leveraging of business playing fields, deploying the available resources at the stage to support emerging businesses. What is clear is that there are businesses that would outlive their relevance after this storm and new businesses that are inspired by new norm and fourth industrial revolution will be formed. We are ready to take up these gadgets and be the first to lead in the new forms of businesses as Black entrepreneurs. So the question that will remain with us as Black entrepreneurs is, are we seeing ourselves in that space? Are we seeing our businesses as the businesses that can take up that space of coming up with new forms of businesses? Or are we going to be chasing a moving train? So part of our responsibility also is adaptation, embracing of innovation and Black technology solution. What we need to do, that is us as government and business, works with the emerging and the Black businesses and companies that are there, is that we hold each other's hand and travel this journey together. Like Asian tigers, let us rise like a python in the ashes of the post-Second World War. South Africans can lead the charge in the continent to build the resilient economy driven by the stable and rising environment of the SMMEs, especially our own Black companies and Black SMMEs. What we need to do at this stage is that we hold our hands together and move forward to make sure that we build an economy that is very resilient. Let us take the opportunities that has been opened up by this COVID-19 pandemic and see the silver a silver line shining in the cloud of this COVID-19 pandemic. I thank you and wish this conference good deliberations and the resolutions that are going to be taking our economy forward and make sure that we build that strong economy for the sake of South Africa and Africa as a whole in the continent. I thank you.